My name is Eric Abrams. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Usually people can hear me. My voice tends to carry. My name is Eric Abrams. I am Director of Diversity Initiatives at the Haas Business School at UC Berkeley. Sounds like there's some bears in the room. I should admit that I root for a different college football team on the other side of the bay. What I want to talk about, my baby sister's a Trojan. What I want to talk about today is a concept that I call big tent diversity, or as the slide says, it's big D versus small d diversity. And I first got interested in working in diversity growing up. I was born in Berkeley, but I grew up kind of split between middle class or an aspirational middle class existence in the Bay Area and inner city Chicago. My mom's family was there. We were back there every summer. When my parents split up for good, not the first time, we moved to Chicago for good, and I realized that the world was different than it was in the Bay Area, even as a kid. And I also realized there was one time where I was walking down the street, I'll never forget it, I was 15 years old, dead of winter, walking up Michigan Avenue at night, and I saw a woman about a block and a half away, and she's walking toward me, and I'm walking toward her, and she makes eye contact with me and dashes across the street. Now, for those of you who know Chicago, Michigan Avenue is a huge street, right? Dead of winter in Chicago, and she dashes across, and I was like, well, that was weird. I kept going. I had to go to the L station. I heard a noise and turned back around and saw that she was crossing the street again. And I realized that she crossed the street to avoid me because she was frightened of me. And yes, I come in a package that some people see as frightening, but I don't want to be a frightening person, and that's where I first got into diversity. So you might be wondering what I mean by big D versus small d diversity. It's important to note that there's no deeper meaning. I don't mean to make a value judgment. I'm not saying big is better than small is better than big. The biggest issue is that big equals big tent. I'm going to define small d diversity as what people usually think about when they think about diversity. So when you think about diversity, what sort of images come to your mind? Now, I'm bound by the rules of Diversity Officers International Union, Local 510, to include an It's a Small World reference in every diversity talk. So perhaps these are some of the images that came to your mind when I wanted to say, what do you think about when you think about diversity? Or maybe you thought of this. Or something like this. Or this. Some people may have thought of this. Or this. Perhaps this. But who's left out? And I started to think about this. I'm like, well, who's left out of these pictures? Are we forgetting someone? Is there something we're not thinking about? Is there a group that we seem to leave out of the diversity conversation? It's coming. Oh yeah! It's the straight cisgendered white guys who often feel left out of the diversity conversation, and I think that's too bad. Keep in mind that 92% of the Fortune 500 is led by white guys who are either straight or presenting as straight. 80% of our senators and the members of the House of Representatives are white guys. Every US president in history, except for one, has been a white guy. If we don't find ways to bring them into the diversity conversation, we won't make any more progress. So that leads me to what I believe are the differences between big D and small d diversity. As I said earlier, the small d is for what people usually think about when you think about diversity. But the big D is a big tent, and it's important, I think, to show everyone that they have something to contribute to the conversation about diversity and something to gain from that conversation. All of us deserve a seat at the table when we're discussing these issues. Now, small d diversity acknowledges the systematic oppression that many groups have faced in American history. This is hugely important. But I believe that in 2015, it's the big D diversity where progress can be made. Now, please note, I'm not advocating whitewashing the past. Yes, that pun was intended. I am suggesting, however, that we understand a chunk of the people in power feel that they not only have nothing to gain from the diversity conversation, but that the conversation will be negative, right? People talking about 400 years of oppression. Somebody might respond with, well, there's not any more racism in America. Heck, we've got a black president. You know, the best golfer a couple years ago was a black guy. There's no racism in America, but as you look at the slide that's on the screen, you can see whether those images are old or new, there's all kinds of racism and sexism and homophobia in our country. And it even affects people in groups who we usually don't think about being discriminated against, particularly in the tech industry. Now, this is something people don't talk about a lot, but I think it's very important to keep in mind. I mean, if you look at the images on the screen, some of them are so odious and so full of hate, and it's also important to notice that this is not just in the United States. You know, people in Australia talking about no more Asians, while the Australian government is trying to position themselves as an Asian country. The quote from Bob Bechtel from Fox News, I think, is especially horrible. You know, he says, we bring them over here and we teach a bunch of Chinamen, Chinese people, how to do computers. They go back to China and they hack into us, right? Well, no, wrong, actually, dude. That's not what happens at all. And you've got a really horrible worldview. But when you look at the history of our country, all sorts of people have been discriminated against in America. You know, there's one slide that talks about the world's melting pot, and it says, you might not be able to see it, but it says at the top, we cannot digest this scum. And part of the scum is the mad notions of Europe. Yes, those crazy European ideas like democracy. We can't digest that. All sorts of people have been discriminated against in the history of America. And I think it's important to realize for those of us who are passionate about issues of diversity, who want to promote diversity in the workplace, in schools, certainly in universities like where I work, and in our personal lives, it's important to realize that no one group has the monopoly on the right answer. And no one group has the monopoly on being evil or being bad. Like I said earlier, I think we've made all the progress we can make by speaking to each other. I'm guessing that everybody in this room believes that greater workplace diversity is a good thing. But there are people who don't feel that way, right? We know them, we work with them, some of us might have them in our families, they might even be, you know, the person we love, who wonders why we're so passionate about diversity. Well, I think it's important for us who are passionate about it to bring those folks into the conversation. To show that even the conservative, religious, cisgendered, straight white guy has something to contribute and to gain from the diversity of the enterprise. But how? How do we do that? Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is that there's little to be gained from exclusion. And one thing that I've seen in my own workplace is often that we try to create organizations that kind of mirror the exclusion that we've experienced, right? Now, employee resource groups are very important. Affinity groups are very important, and I would never say they're not important. We have a number of affinity groups at Haas. But one of the things I've tried to tell our students, and this has been very controversial, is that the school-funded affinity group needs to be open to everybody. That anybody who wants to learn about people different than themselves should be able to join, should be able to have the opportunity to do that. As you can imagine, there was some pushback around this, right? I've had students come into my office and be like, come on, Eric, but you know, we need a place where we can just talk and not have to deal with the man, you know? And I'm like, absolutely, I would never say you don't need that place. I respect that place, you definitely need that place, and I hope you have, and I can even tell you what it is. And then you say, a student would go like, well, what? I'm like, yeah. That's your apartment. That's your house. That's the bar across the street. But the group that the school funds has to be open to everybody. And I can give you an example of why. I gave a talk in front of our incoming MBA students a couple of years ago during orientation, standard diversity talk. And a day or so later, a guy comes up to my office and he's like, Eric, I really liked what you had to say about diversity, but you know, there's nothing there for me. And I'm like, what do you mean there's nothing there for you? He's like, I'm a straight white guy. What do I have to contribute? And I knew a little bit about his background. I'm like, but didn't you go to the Naval Academy? Well, yeah, I did. And you grew up on a farm in Alabama, didn't you? And he was like, no, actually, I grew up on a farm in Georgia. How many MBA students at Berkeley do you think went to a military academy and grew up on a farm in Georgia? Well, not that many, and I'm also kind of politically conservative. And I'm like, and that's your contribution to the diversity of our class. What? I can, yes, you can. And he walked out of there all puffed up. And you know what he did the next week? He joined our Women in Leadership group because he knew he needed to learn about women because he had been in male-dominated hierarchical organizations his whole life. So to get past these kinds of issues, we can promote co-learning, workshops, exercises, and small groups that allow everyone to contribute to the learning of the group. And that way, nobody will feel left out or excluded or like they don't matter. And facilitators must bring in the input of everyone. And let's keep in mind, white males themselves are not a monolithic group. There's much diversity in the white male community, whether it's ethnic, socioeconomic, schooling experience, and that should not get lost in the larger diversity issues. Often in conversations about diversity, the straight white guys are described as the bad guys, the evil, the oppressor. Is there anybody in the room who would feel good about being described as being evil or being the oppressor? I don't think so. We have to understand that there are plenty of white guys in the workplace who didn't go to Andover or Hotchkiss before they joined a frat at Princeton or Dartmouth. And even those who've had that educational privilege might be aware of the privilege that they have. So when we do that, when we're able to show everyone that they have something to gain from a more inclusive workplace, then we'll really have the type of strength in numbers that brought the Warriors the championship this spring. That's it. Thank you.